Welcome to the SuperHero Conversations, the podcast saga with innovation leaders who will be at Supernova, the #1 tech innovation event in Benelux, happening in the end of March 2025 in Antwerp, Belgium. I'm your host, Dominic Dichuk, and joining me today are the superheroes, Niels Van Damme, the co-founder and the CTO of OTIV, and Sven De Cleyn, the program director at imec.istart. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to be here.
Fantastic. So for the context, could you please give us a bit of a biography of yourself? What have you done? What are you doing now? And maybe what are your plans for the future?
Will I kick off?
Go for it.
Well, my background is I studied commercial engineering or business engineering, whatever you want to call it. And I always translate that I understand technology to some degree, but then help translate technology into business. And after graduating, I started doing a PhD. So I've been researching actually academic spin-off companies emerging from European research institutes on what makes them survive in the first place and become successful later on as well, potentially, from a rather holistic perspective. So looking at all angles on what makes these kind of technology-driven spin-off companies become successful companies, yes or no. And then at the end of my PhD, I've actually been contacted by a headhunter. They were looking for someone at a research institute at that time called iMinds, but forget that name now. It merged with imec in the meanwhile. So let's talk about imec only in the future, in the rest of the conversation. To basically set up a support program for young tech-driven startups, which then became ultimately imec.istart, a startup accelerator. And that's what I've been doing now for the past almost 14 years and still actually having a lot of fun doing it.
All right. Yeah, so on my end, I'm now 32. And it's quite funny. I also started as business engineering. After a couple of years, it turned out that wasn't necessarily my strong suit because basically my friends were playing business games and then doing like competition in terms of finance things. And I was basically repairing bikes and repairing motorcycles. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm more in the what I would call actual engineering. So then I moved to electromechanical engineering. After that, I always aspired to basically have my own company because I didn't necessarily know who to work for or what company to work for in Belgium. I then actually had the opportunity to spend almost a year in Silicon Valley, working with startups, seeing if they had a software or hardware that could actually fit the market. Came back and then together with Sam started OTIV. That's now for 5 years. The 6th of February was the 5th year anniversary of OTIV. And yeah, best decision in my life actually. So very grateful of what we've accomplished already.
And could you explain what does OTIV actually do?
Yeah, super tangible. We make everything that is on rails, we automate it or we make it autonomous, so driverless. Very similar to autonomous cars, but then on rails. So you need to think about a tram that drives through the city center or a train that brings you from one city to another. And also a lot of industrial sites have rail operations. That's what we do.
And Sven, a lot of people know about imec. They know that it's a huge institution. It's a huge corporation, I would say, that does innovation, but nobody actually knows what it actually does. Could you explain the correlation between imec.istart and imec?
Sure. Yeah, that's a question I get quite often. What does the imec in imec.istart stand for? Huh? So basically, imec is indeed, as you say, it's a research institute primarily. Just last week, imec hired its 6,000th employee. So we're 6,000 people strong. And the bread and butter of what imec does is actually to develop new innovations in the field of mainly semiconductors, but a bit broader than that. I would say it's also, it for example, also includes battery technology, photovoltaics, software, AI. But we're most known for the chips and the semicon part of what we do. And actually, we're active in what you could call a pre-competitive space where investments to develop really groundbreaking new technologies that typically enter only in new products in, let's say, a 5 to 10 year window from now, that's, I would say, doing that kind of research on your own as an individual company becomes too expensive because you need quite expensive lab facilities, fab equipment. And so basically what imec does is in a stage where it does not necessarily go into very specific applications yet tailored to the needs of one individual company, combine the forces of a number of industry players together, and then develop those kind of new technology building blocks that are relevant for all of those players. So it's a lot of industry-driven research, typically pre-competitive. And then, of course, in a later stage, the players that are active in our research programs can take those technology building blocks and further, I would say, develop them into what their specific needs are for their specific use cases.
So you would say that imec.istart is accelerator with science-driven accelerator, or what is the program? What does it look like?
Actually, the program imec.istart is in the first place a business accelerator. So we focus on the business side of things. But of course, indeed, the tech part is important for us. So we only focus on tech-driven or tech-enabled kind of businesses.
For me, it's very founder-oriented, right?
Exactly.
It's like, how do you get from zero to the first steps? That's really what I at least saw when doing the acceleration program. It really helps out the founders. It's like, how do you hire your first person? Here is an example of a contract. How do you make a contract with a first client? And these kind of things, that was very much helpful for us.
Yeah, and I think that's indeed what you describe is, I think, exactly our sweet spot. It's helping young tech startups going from almost literally 0 to 1. Not necessarily from 1 to 10 or from 10 to 100. It's really helping the founders in their first steps of building their tech startup. And of course, having this backbone of 6,000 billion scientists helps us in understanding the technology that they're using much better. But the focus is indeed more on the business and the people side of things. That's absolutely true.
But and even when you grow, because we had these discussions as well when we were growing, you can leverage the technology or the people behind, let's say, imec.istart in the bigger imec group. That's definitely available, I would say.
Yeah, correct. And so then basically what we do is it's a combination of support, coaching, mentoring, and a first pre-seed investment that also helps to later on hopefully leverage and attract more funding from other sources also faster than you would usually be able to do so. And basically that's kind of the thing. So it's not a one-size-fits-all program. You have to look at it as basically a menu list in a restaurant. You have a whole number of dishes. And together with the founders, at any point in time, we look at, okay, what do you need and when do you need it and in which format do you need it?
Yeah, and for us, it was very much putting like a base layer. Yeah. One example is like even in 5 years from now, we still have contacts with our contact at imec.istart. For example, the shareholders agreement, because imec.istart was the first investor, is very much today, and even though we had several investors after that, today is still very much based on the shareholders agreement that we had with imec.istart, because it's a good foundation to work from. It's a good foundation to jump from. And that's basically why we joined the acceleration program.
So let's use the time machine and kind of transfer yourself back to the beginning of the cooperation between imec.istart and OTIV. What stage was OTIV in? What were the people around? How many people there were? Take me back to that situation.
I'm not sure if that's true, but we might have been like a bit too early for you guys, because basically we didn't have a company yet. We were 2 people, which was Sam and myself, 2 co-founders, in my bedroom working on the idea of bringing autonomous rail to the market. But we just had a stellar pitch deck. We had some tech developed by myself, which is, there's no line of code that still exists at OTIV that was built by me.
It was almost built at the kitchen table.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So for us, that was like, it was a bit, how do you see it? Was like a prerequisite for us to really dive into the OTIV, let's say, story. Is like, can we convince someone else? In this case, it was imec.istart. Can we convince someone else of the vision and the idea we had? And that was back in, I think it was 2019 that we did the pitch.
Correct.
And then we were founded the 6th of February in 2020. And that was basically, I mean, you were there signing the stack of documents because it was, and we started the company and we got an initial investment from imec.istart. So for us, that was like, okay, we now have this idea and we can actually act upon it. We can do more than what we have now. For example, hiring people and going out and see how we can actually bring this product, which we didn't have, but the idea at least to the market. So that was for us was the first time meeting a VC, let's say, or an investment company. First time that we were actually challenged on everything from the company. It's not only just a pitch deck, but it was like, okay, but how are you going to hire? What do you need? Who are the clients? Like it was a whole broad thing of like, what is this company going to be and how do you envision it? Which also, obviously we got the questions and we got them beforehand, made us think about the things we actually had to think about, which was also quite good for us. So that's a bit how we got into it. I think, imec.istart is very well known, I think, at least today, but back in the day, it was very well known as like, if you have something related to tech and you're looking for people that can help you out or an ecosystem, imec.istart was very known. There were, I think, you guys have quite a bit of people trying to join every single cohort or every single year.
We now have a portfolio of 340 companies, so that helps.
Exactly, yeah.
But when you were saying we might have been too early, actually that's not the case.
Okay, that's good.
In the sense that we're mainly, I would say, indeed, we're looking at typically founders that have a vision, and we basically invest in founding teams we believe in. And that's the bare basics of, I mean, we invest in people. Not necessarily so much in a company and in technology, because we know that technology will shift anyway. You will pivot probably multiple times even. But of course, we need to have... So the reason why we ask for kind of a first prototype proof of concept of the first technology is basically to help us understand, are these people capable of making the final product that will go to the market in the end? It's not so much about that prototype per se. It's really about... do we believe in these people and their vision? And of course, then formally you ask for some things around that to help us validate that feeling.
Yeah.
But that's basically it. So,
Yeah, and I think one of the prerequisites for imec is also having two people. Is that still the case? Yeah. Or two, not two founders, or like people that can.
We've actually learned the hard way that single founders in tech is a very hard thing to do.
Yeah.
So we're indeed looking for teams with at least two co-founders.
Yeah, and I think that's from what we now in retrospect have seen was actually really, really relevant and super important, because we've learned multiple times over the last 5 years that, as a founder, you have the energy that you have. And at some point, one person has more energy than the other, and then they can take more. And we can really bounce off of each other in these times. But also when you're thinking about stuff, you can reflect. You have a bit of let's say a whiteboard to talk to. And then that reflects with you about certain things. That's super relevant. And I found it odd at the start. Like, why is a single founder, I would not say not that great, but difficult. And now I realize that it is indeed difficult. We know a couple of people that actually are single founders. And you see that they come to us for...
They often struggle with that, huh?
It's like, I make the decisions, but it's also you thinking about it. So you're in your own head. And then all of a sudden you might make mistakes because you have blind spots and you don't think about things or you don't see things. And that's very much different when having two people steering the boat, let's say.
Sven, you're investing in super early stage, and you're actually not only investing money, but also the time of your mentors, of the experts. Could you give us a nice kind of overview of how many companies have been in imec.istart, how many successful, how many not, how many bankrupt, how many unicorns, and so on?
So roughly, the rough numbers, 340 companies we've invested in and started supporting so far. Today, still more than 80% is still active, which is in tech an extremely high number. So that basically means currently roughly still in portfolio, roughly 240 companies. So that means 100 are out of our portfolio for now. And of that 100, 45 went bankrupt or ceased operations. Sometimes you also can close down the company still before a formal bankruptcy. And 55 to 60 made an exit. And an exit means either being acquired by another company or where, and that's also for us a very positive scenario, where the management team or the founders are strong enough to say like, hey, we can make you an offer to buy back your shares at a reasonable price in a kind of win-win situation. For us, that kind of management buyout, if you like, is also a very positive ending and a good scenario. One unicorn so far. So 1 out of 5 Belgian tech unicorns being delivered came through imec.istart. And also indirectly though, 1 IPO even. So 1 company that went to the stock exchange. It's actually the same founders as the delivered founders with Posios, their first company. They came to imec.istart, were acquired by another company that was a kind of part equity, part cash deal. And so we became a shareholder in the acquirer of Posios, and they went to the stock exchange. So indirectly, we witnessed that as well.
Niels, what is the current state of OTIV? What have you done? Yeah. What are your plans? And of course, as investors and people like to hear predictions. So I would like to hear predictions.
It's a big question. A lot has been done. So now we're 35 people. We started in 2020. Obviously, COVID hit. That was rough on everyone, but especially on the idea of like, is it the best scenario to start a startup? In the end, turned out it is. Where we are 35 people, we have clients all over Europe. Actually, we don't necessarily have a lot of clients in Belgium. The first clients were in the Netherlands even. Might be something to do with innovation and that in Belgium it might be, might be a bit less. But in any case, we have clients all over Europe. And in terms of the technology, we're actually gonna put an autonomous tram in, let's say, a closed-off environment this year in 2025. And we're starting with an autonomous train as well this year and in the course of 2026. That's very tangible. Obviously, we're not only doing autonomous technology, we're bringing assisted system to the market, we're bringing remote control to the market, which is like the stepwise approach going from not having any technology in these vehicles all the way to autonomous technologies. And some countries are just way ahead. For example, the autonomous tram project, that's in Oslo, in Norway. You see that they see the value, they have the money, and they want to move forward. So that's where we are today. We're expanding the team as well. I discussed it with Sven before, but we're now also fundraising to actually take the next steps in terms of operations and moving towards expanding our technology, because the core value at OTIV is the data that we capture. We have arguably the biggest rail data set in the world, and obviously we want to expand on that and capitalize on that and have more systems in the field, and hopefully available autonomous vehicles in 2030. That's the goal, or at least our technology will be ready to bring it to the market in 2030.
Okay.
Yeah.
And 2030, it's about five years now from now. But let's say it's 2050. So how many years? A lot.
Then for sure we at least have a second Belgian unicorn in our portfolio.
Yeah, right? that in any case. And so the question is, what about 2050?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
For me, it's basically that I always compare it to if you buy a laptop and you open it up, it's like Intel inside or AMD inside. What I would like is that every vehicle that is on the tracks has like OTIV technologies inside, and either is completely driverless or there is some form of technology and OTIV there. But I think 2050, then we're talking about more than just rail. I mean, we're now doing rail, which makes sense. For us, it was at that point in time, we didn't want to compete with the automotive industry. You saw billions of dollars being invested at that time, 2018, 2019, in autonomous cars, let's say. So we're like, okay, we're not going to compete on that level. We're not USA in that regard. Investors don't have that deep pockets here and are maybe not as willing to invest in autonomous cars as they are in the US. So yeah, for us, it made sense to go for a niche market where technology-wise, I would say it's simpler. I would never say it's simple or easy, but it's easier, let's say, because you have the tracks and you can only brake or accelerate. You can't even go backwards, which is not allowed on tracks. So yeah, in theory, the technology is simpler than an autonomous car. But for me, this technology, or at least the brain that we're building, is not only something that can be used in rails in the future. We will expand to other verticals, I would say.
And railway is actually like one of the most conservative and the oldest kind of industry out there. So maybe when you were investing, did you have any doubts that, you know, the Belgian railway will never implement some software that two guys built in their kitchen, or how do you actually, you know, convert that idea into actual big clients?
First of all, we look by definition from the start beyond the borders of Belgium, and whether their first customer would be in Belgium or abroad. Actually, we even didn't care that much. Because especially when building a tech startup, you need to look at least at the European level, if not globally, from day zero. So whether the NMBS or the LAN would buy from OTIV as first customer or not,
it's not a deal breaker, right?
It's not a deal breaker. And to some extent, it's irrelevant. Of course, you hope to have adoption locally as well, as fast as possible. But for us, and of course, yes, we were fully aware that the sales cycles of selling to these kind of typically very big organizations, and indeed not always the fastest adopters of new innovation, would be a challenge. But that's maybe also, Niels, where you have to explain a bit the vision of the different products you have, because I would say the full autonomous technology and vision they had in mind was only sort of called the masterpiece of their entire product portfolio. And they very intelligently sliced it in different slices and product visions that they had around that to get to that ultimate goal. And that's also the vision that we believed in from day zero.
And it's still the vision we have today, because indeed, if you just knock on the door of an NMBS or the LAN or any operator that has rail and just say, we're going to bring autonomous technology and tomorrow we can already deliver, it's not going to happen. That's what you said. It's very conservative. They need to vet their suppliers. They need to understand. You need to have like some kind of collaboration before, and that's indeed the vision we have. Is we bring it in a stepwise approach. We bring it through assistance, remote control, and then autonomous technology. And as Sven said, autonomous technology for our business to thrive it's the cherry on top. Like, we're making a profitable business with assisted systems, with remote control, and obviously we hope that we can bring the autonomous technology on top. To the market, but it's the cherry on top, and obviously the vision and the North Star that we're following.
And if I may add, there is of course not only your customers and also OEMs that build the vehicles for your customers that need to be willing to share the same vision and act upon it. But it's also, I would say, factors around that, like sometimes legislation in local countries need to be adapted to allow even autonomous vehicles to drive onto rails. So there is much more factors that come into play there. And that's why also we believed in their smart vision of slicing it up in different pieces.
Because indeed what we see today, assisted remote control, that can happen. But autonomous, like an autonomous tram, putting it in a city center, there's no legal framework at the moment. But obviously we're there also on European level, creating that framework, sitting together with municipalities and just making sure that we're going in the right direction, that we can actually deliver this in the future.
Could you explain what is assisted remote control?
Yeah, so assisted systems are... so in general, what we do is we have a software component and a hardware component. Hardware component consists of sensors and compute units that we put in the vehicles. And the first stage is assisted driving. So basically, there is still a driver, but he or she is assisted in their operations. And this can then move to... It's very similar to what you have in your car with cruise control and adaptive cruise control, and you have cars that even do lane changes, etc. These are the kind of features that we also, they're a bit different in rail, but these are the kind of features that we're offering today to our clients. And this is the first step, because the first step is bringing in the hardware, because no vehicles now are manufactured with any sensors in there, which is ludicrous. But yeah, there's no sensors there. So the first thing is bringing in that hardware, locking in our hardware into these vehicles, and then progressively update the software towards autonomous driving. So assisted is really, you have an assisted system that basically guides you navigating complex environments like a city center or an industrial park or something. And then remote control is what you see in rail is that, apparently no one who graduates wants to drive a train, but and not a bus or a tram or any public transport kind of thing. So you just see a structural issue on European, but actually globally you see a structural issue in getting drivers. So one part is obviously, if you don't have a driver, and then the assisted system doesn't make sense. So there we go to remote control, where you basically take out that person and put it in a centralized location where it can easily switch between vehicles to operate them. Where they, for example, might be 50% autonomous in very easy to navigate locations, and then the other 50% is, for example, remotely controlled. And those steps are always taken towards more and more.
You see the
autonomy.
same evolution, by the way, happening in ships and boats. Huh? So also for inline shipping, for example, they have the same structural issue of finding enough captains. And you see also their movement towards, assisted first and then remotely controlled. So it's exactly the same movement.
And for us, that vision came a bit because of automotive, because there you saw a lot of companies raising billions of dollars with the only task, let's say, is bring an autonomous vehicle on the streets. And then you see that a lot of them didn't make it. And a lot of them are now, they're bankrupt, they don't exist anymore. Where we said, especially because of the conservative environment we are in, that's not something we can do. We have to find a way to actually bring it gradually to the market. And then we build that vision and build that approach in OTIV.
Sven, you've been both in academia and in the private sector. And there's a stigma or kind of a misconception that people in academia, it's really hard for them to build an actual business that actually makes money. Could you share your advice, your experience on how you can actually put the scientist that works in a safe environment in the lab, in a university, gets paid monthly and regularly, how he or she can actually make money from that technology?
There's, of course, different routes to bring technology to the market and to bring academic inventions to the market. And one of them is, of course, I would say basically license your technology out to an existing player in the market. And I think that's a very fair way to bring new technologies to the market in many cases. So not every scientist or academic inventor needs to become an entrepreneur. I don't think that would be a wise thing. Which actually, by the way, is one of the conclusions of my PhD. So one of the very strong conclusions of my PhD was, please make sure that the academic inventor of the technology has a role in the spin-off company when the technology is being brought to the market, but please, on average, do not let that person become the CEO of the company. That being said, I would say there are, of course, also great examples of scientists turning into entrepreneurs and building great and successful companies. So it's not impossible at all, on the contrary. But I think a lot depends on the attitude of the person as such. I think, and that's also when I look, for example, also at recruiting people for imec.istart, for the imec.istart team to act as a coach for the startups. Know-how and skills you can learn. Changing an attitudes of a person is much more difficult. So even, I would say, very deep technologists, scientists that are very deep in their technological field and that don't know anything about business, you can learn the skills of building a business and what needs to be done to build a successful business from an, I would say, business or economic viewpoint. But they need to be open in terms of mindset to want to learn and adapt and adopt those kind of learnings. And that's the main thing there. So yeah, I absolutely believe there is a whole bunch of ways to bring academic science into businesses, whether it's through licensing, to creating spin-outs, to do contract research for a company. There are a multitude of ways. But if you choose the way like, hey, I really want to build an own company, become an entrepreneur, I think a lot depends on really the attitude of the person. As
Yeah,
such.
and that attitude will come because of the urgency. If you're not used to having an urgency, it will definitely come when starting your own business, that the urgency is there. Because the cliche that I was a guy, if someone can work for 4 years on something to then conclude that it's not happening or that he or she is not suited for starting a business, it's not true. It's a cliche, but yeah, the attitude is indeed one of the main things, and you'll get to learn the ins and outs of running a business while doing it.
Yeah. And of course, it also depends a bit on the technological complexity of what you're building.
Yeah.
For example, in some fields like in biotech and pharma, or in semicon for that matter, sometimes it takes years before you can actually prove that what you have in mind or what works in a lab, that you can also industrialize it. So sometimes companies that come from academia fail still 5 or even 10 years down the road afterwards.
Yeah.
Because they cannot get the technology working, but it not necessarily is due to the fact that the scientist has not turned into a good entrepreneur, but sometimes the science is not scalable.
Yeah, it just takes a long time. Yeah.
Niels, I'm sure you had a lot of failures, a lot of broken code, a lot of bugs, a lot of...
Oh, no, they didn't. No.
They didn't.
Everything went fine the first try.
Yeah.
No.
That's good. Maybe you could share the failures that you encountered and that you could have avoided if you knew that. Of course, you can learn from the mistakes of others, but making the mistakes on your own is the best way to learn. But for all the founders, just starting a technological startup, maybe there are some concepts, some problems that you encountered that they could avoid.
For us, I think, because we're now in a scaling phase. And I think for me, the biggest concept that maybe people told me, and some people say otherwise, is scaling too early when you're not ready. You hear a lot of people like, but if you're not ashamed of the first product that you've put in the field, then you were too late because then you've refined too often, etc. But we learned the hard way that and might be very specific to our industry. But if you scale too early and you have all these systems all over Europe in all of these vehicles, and the system is not on point, you have quite a bit of, let's say, backlog that all of a sudden pops up because you need to go there and you need to be all over Europe to fix these issues. So for us, this definitely was, and it's still a balance you need to find, right? It's like, when is the system good enough to start scaling? Especially since, we have a hardware component, and everyone always says, and I agree that hardware is hard, but it's just because it can fail in different ways. And if it has not been through QA and it has not been on point, and you start scaling, your issues scale as well. And for some companies, that's fine. If it's purely software, you might be able to remotely update everything, or you have a platform that you can update and get feedback from clients. But for us, we learned the hard way that if your system is not on point and you start scaling, your issues will scale with it. So it's a bit of a balance. Of course, we want to go or we wanted to go fast to the market, but it's a bit of a balance.
Now, if I may add to that, I think that's what many people. So you're absolutely right that finding the right point to start scaling is a very difficult one also. But for me, that's also the difference between what I would call problem-solution fit and product-market fit. So, and a lot of people mistake problem-solution fit from being product-market fit. What do I mean by that? For me, problem-solution fit is indeed you manage to build a product that does the thing for your client, that solves the issue that you want to solve for your clients. But that not necessarily means you can, I would say, find customers in a structured sales process where you can repeatedly do the same trick again, to say it very unrespectfully. And first, I think you need to really find, okay, but what works for one customer may not be the perfect solution yet for a second and a third and a fourth customer. So let's first find out on a broader customer base what works and what the pain points are, also in terms of implementation, before you really start scaling.
Yeah, definitely in terms of technology and implementation, because one of the things that we had was a very small example, which turned out to be quite big, is that our assisted systems for the remote control, for example, it uses the network. It uses connectivity, 4G, 5G, private networks, etc. And then we had a client in France, and we're like, okay, but we already did this in the Netherlands. We were good to go to at least do the first customer in France. We'll see what kind of those were the things, the language barrier and how we can actually, because they do business differently. Turns out that France has decided to remove all the 4G and switch it with 5G, and our system was at that point in time not capable of connecting to these 5G bands. So this was a very technical hurdle that we had to solve, which changed the product a bit, but made us like wanting to scale, and then all of a sudden have a lot of issues, and then understanding what the issues were, and then actually remediating them. And that was one of that's a bit like, if you're not ready to scale, we should have known basically, and we didn't at that point in time.
So the answer would be more research.
More research, and I'm glad we did it. It was not we didn't have the issues on a full rollout. Luckily, we always start with, okay, we'll do a one pilot, and then we started having these things. So we just had to delay the rollout. So it was not a huge issue for us to actually accommodate that issue, but it was definitely a learning curve, and it's definitely something that you could say that it was a bit baked in with the fact that we always do a pilot first to understand if everything is ready to go and then scale up. So we're never going to just enter a country and then just start scaling. But still, it had more troubles and more issues than we expected, basically.
But I would say it's also part of your customer intimacy. Yeah? So I would say by being in touch with your customer or your future customer very frequently, you have more chance of capturing that kind of crucial piece of information early onwards. And of course, if you don't do that enough and you don't dare to invest in that enough, then you will encounter those issues much more often, I guess.
Sven, you see a lot of startups fail, come up with new ideas, succeed like every year. I know it's quite a general question and it's quite hard to answer. Maybe you could give a factor, a personality trait, something that unites all of the ones who fail and all of the ones who succeed in some level.
Let me start with the successful cases first. What I see there typically as a trait is that the founders are really passionate about the problem they want to solve in the market. Whatever the problem is, and irrespective of the technology, they need to solve that problem. So technology as such, and that may sound strange from someone working for imec, technology is irrelevant. That's a means to an end. You want to solve a challenge, and whether you need technology A, B, or C, in the end, that doesn't matter for your customer. But the passion for, I'm really, I would say, basically waking up and going to bed with that problem that I want to solve for my customers, that's the common trait I see, that passion for that specific issue that I see among the successful founders, or the most successful ones. On the negative side, what we see most often for the companies that fail in our portfolio, maybe strangely enough, it's not because of a lack of market, lack of funding, because the technology doesn't work. The major thing we see why startups fail is founder issues. Basically, disagreement in the founding team. And that's also why after a couple of years in our selection process, we started to have someone in our team. She's a psychologist by background, and she does a screening on the individual founders and the dynamics in the founding team before taking a selection decision in the end. Because we see in our portfolio, at least, that's one of the major reasons for failures.
That's really interesting. I actually heard quite a lot of VC funds actually do the psychology screening.
You see it more and more often, true.
Yeah. We actually also did it. They just wanted to understand. I think it was more on complementary, but also like, who are you and what is your capability as well in terms of being a founder?
When you're starting a company, it's usually that you don't have money, you have again, passion, and you have some people. What is the motivation curve or motivation, I would say, dynamics in a company? Because you usually have to motivate your team without money. And when you have to deliver the product, especially a technology behind the product and to make it on a high level, you have to motivate so the team actually delivers. What are the best tools? What are the best metrics to measure those dynamics of motivation in the team?
Yeah, I think that's it's a difficult one, in a sense that obviously everyone has. You need to realize that the priority for people that work for a company is not usually the company. They have other things in life. They have a family. They have, and for me as a founder, and for Sam as well, like OTIV is our child. It's our baby. This is everything to us. So motivation for me, and what we see from the team is, first of all, leading by example. I think what we had, because we did reviews and we did some analysis as well within OTIV, and most of the people that joined OTIV was because of the founders, because of our motivation, our work ethic, the way we handle stuff, the way we talk, the way we interact with them. That was first, but also it's the vision. That where are we going? And for us, we're quite, let's say, in luck, I would say that, but the fact that we have this stepwise approach also brings you to like, okay, we are now in this phase of the company, but we're going there, but we're now in the first phase.
The North Star is clear.
The North Star is clear.
Yeah.
The first phase we've reached. Okay, and now we go to the second phase. Let's put in the works because the North Star is there, and you go to the third phase. And so for us, it's more, everyone here also believes in Rail and is very fond of Rail. I think of the 35 people that are here, I think a handful of people has asked for a company car, because they don't need it, the others don't need it. So it's like they really believe in this kind of mobility and want to change it. And then obviously, very technological people really love to work on the cutting edge. And this is still the cutting edge that we're working on. So what we see is it's in terms of technology, it's in terms of actually delivering on your promises, not only to the client, but just as a team, you deliver, and then having that North Star super clear. Those are, for me, what I see motivates the people internally, that they can just have the grit to keep on working towards that North Star.
If I can look at that from a bit higher level across our portfolio, basically as a founder, you're trying to sell to some extent your vision basically to all your stakeholders. And whether that's your future employees, you're basically selling your vision and your company culture to them on how you see things and how you want to work together. But it's the same with investors. It's the same with suppliers. You basically take them along your vision and you sell that vision. And the people that join your company and stay in your company especially, they basically share the same vision.
So when you have seen a lot of founders during imec, they already have some money, but before they need to prove the concept, they need to build something. So what are the practical maybe aspects of keeping a team together without paying them salaries?
Well, I would say the first thing is go to the market as soon as possible, because that will earn you some money that you can use to start paying your first employees or freelancers or whatever kind of, and yourself obviously as well. And typically the founders of a startup don't pay themselves too much in the first 2-3 years, sometimes even longer. That's not an ideal situation. You also have a family to maintain. But go to the market as soon as possible. And the market, of course, comes in many shapes and forms. It doesn't necessarily need to be your the customer that buys your fully polished version 1.0 of your product. They can also, to some extent, pay some advances on building a first prototype, or you can get some grants or attract investors. It can take many forms and shapes. We
even did something in the middle of doing consulting. It was like an operator wanting to understand what sensors could do for automation and assisted driving. And we were like, okay, let's just take on this project. And we could work with sensors that we've chosen ourselves. And we were working with a team that was actually also interested in these kind of technologies. So the outcome was not a product, or was just basically feedback to that operator, like these are the kind of sensors you would need. But for us, this was super valuable. First of all, to work with a big operator, we still we still thrive on that. And it was like one-off project, which was quite small. But still, it was super relevant for us, and it paid the bills.
Yeah, it is kind of consultancy that fits into your product
Exactly,
roadmap anyway,
exactly.
so that's fine.
Yeah.
I often see also founders that start do consultancy that completely has nothing to do with the roadmap. Usually, it distracts them a lot from going where they need to go. But of course, I'd say the second aspect I also want to stress towards your team and the people you need to pay at the end of the month, ideally, be open and transparent. And also, as a startup, you can have rough times cash-wise. If that's the case, communicate well upfront to your team. And in most cases, they will say like, hey, we understand. Let's find a solution that works for everyone. And if that means you will only be able to pay me a month later than you actually should, usually that's not a big issue if you communicate openly and timely enough.
Let's talk about Belgium. We know that Belgium people, I would say industries are quite conservative, but very reliable. Sven, maybe you could start with bringing out one thing that could be much better in Belgium, startup ecosystem-wise, founding a startup-wise, and one thing that is extremely great. And you have seen, startups all over the world, and you think, yes, Belgium is the best at this, but this aspect should be improved.
Well, actually, what I will give as an answer is two sides of the same coin. On one hand, we're known for, I think, to a large extent, our modesty. And the other side of the same coin is maybe not being ambitious enough at the same time. But I think the modesty on how we behave as business people, so to speak, whether it's founders or investors or people in general, we are warmly welcomed almost anywhere we come around the world. We're not too, we're typically very open, quite modest, great people to work with in general. That's how we're often perceived.
I would also say quite capable. Like we have a good educational system. The engineers that we have are good.
Yeah,
that's definitely something.
Yeah, and I'm getting the chance to work in more and more countries because also as imec.istart, we're eating our own dog food. We say to our startups, you need to think big enough and internationalize. We're doing that as well. So we've already started to work in the Netherlands, in Italy, and a few more countries coming up. What I see in general of when I meet founders elsewhere around the globe is indeed the quality of the founders and the technology and the ideas we have in Belgium is for sure not of a lower quality than what I see elsewhere. On the contrary, even. But we typically don't sell it well enough.
Yeah, that's. I remember when I was pitching back in the day, even before 2019, the idea was already lingering in my head, and people were just like, but shouldn't you do something simple? Shouldn't you do like you're an engineer? Can you just? Even my parents, but they were quite chill about it. But they also often thought like, what is he doing? Like, is this gonna be something?
Shouldn't you go work for a big company where you have your paycheck at the end of the month?
Exactly. Turns out to be a good decision in the end, but yeah.
And luckily, and it's maybe a strange parallel I will make now, I've seen it change more or less simultaneously with, I should now say, almost the previous generation of the Red Devils, our national soccer team. Back in the 90s, early 2000s, I would say the self-esteem was not at its highest, to put it bluntly. Whereas there was a new generation of soccer players that came up and said like, hey, but we can conquer the world and we can go in and be meaningful at World Cups and European championships. And that's the same evolution I see in Belgian founders. Without, again, becoming overly ambitious, still being realistic, but the ambition level in general is increasing. And I think that's a good thing.
And it's also because we have examples.
You have role models.
We
absolutely.
have role models.
Yeah,
it's like,
that helps.
Okay, a company from Belgium can actually make it big. So why wouldn't we?
Yeah.
And that helps. That definitely helps.
Imagine if you took the ambition and the ability to sell yourself from the US founders and combine it with the technological kind of expertise and the modesty and the transparency of the Belgium. Maybe you can combine forces.
We don't need to look that remotely even. I always say the Belgian people that have the idea and that they built the technology and the Dutch salesman might be a great combination here.
But it is true that one of our investors always said, within the first 10 people, you should hire an American because they just think differently.
That's true.
And we did. And they do think differently, and they might think bigger or just have a different view on the world.
Was he a salesperson?
He was not a salesperson. He was a tech person. But still, you see that somehow it's baked in, because that person also lives in Belgium for quite some time. But it's like baked in that they, I don't know, have to think big or something.
It's simple. If you look at a map of the world, and you look at where Belgium is compared to the size of the US or of China or whatever, we're so small. We, by definition, need to think much bigger. At least the scale of Europe. That should be our first playing field, not the level of Belgium.
And Niels, some maybe key aspects of founding a company in Belgium. What is great? What is great about starting, and what is not so great?
Yeah. So for me, first of all, the people. We have great engineers. Also, the system that we have, I think it's quite, let's say, convenient to start a company here. Even if it goes a bit wrong, you have a bit of a fallback system, which you might not have in other countries. So that's definitely, it gives you a bit of comfort, let's say, which is not necessarily good always, but it gives you a bit of comfort. What I don't like about Belgium. Yeah, it's very difficult because I spent a year in Silicon Valley, and I always thought, but this is the place to be. Here everything is gonna work. And it turns out I came back and I was like, you don't have to be in Silicon Valley to start a startup. You don't have to be in Silicon Valley to become big. You don't have to be in Silicon Valley to put a stamp on the world. That's definitely not the case. So we
not
can
necessarily the case.
Not necessarily the case, but
no, it's true.
That's a bit my takeaway. And are there things that can go better? Probably, but I think we're on the right path at the moment. We don't have a lot of Belgian hurdles in front of us. It's more making the tech, implementing it on a global level. So it's not necessarily a Belgian thing if there's something that is not going great, I would say.
That's good. So that's a really patriotic answer. I think you will get a nice grant afterwards.
Yeah, but it's also, if I may add to that, it's I would say we're often complaining very fast about our environment and how Belgium is being run, and of course things can improve for sure. But you're absolutely right that there are a lot of things going quite well as well, and actually a lot of things in our country, especially when you look at the tech and innovation side of things, there is an amazing support system.
Yeah,
you have Vlaio with great grants to help develop risky kind of new technologies. Of course, we have an increasing amount of successful founders that can help with some mentoring and some investments as well. So the investment ecosystem has grown a lot as well in a positive sense. We have indeed great education still and good people. So there is a lot of positive elements. It's not all too bad, even though we like complaining a lot often.
That's really good. Let's end this kind of conversation with this positive note. I would like to ask you a quick kind of round of questions, quick one sentence answers. Maybe a book that you would recommend to all the founders.
Yeah, I read a book once on it's some kind of lean startup. I don't know the name again, but it really brings you back to what a team should be and what it takes you to keep moving a company. I can't recall the name.
You can put it in our comments.
I will do that.
Fantastic.
I'll do the same. I think I'm doubting on the title of the book. I think it was called Streetwise. It's actually how to learn from people that live on the street and how to use that knowledge and those lessons learned for founders. It's also a great book to read.
What's a question that I have not asked you today that you would like that I would have asked you? Or the topics that we have not covered? Or just a comment from you that you would like our listeners.
Usually I get the answer, will we ever have autonomous vehicles and when will we have them? That's usually a question that I get. I don't necessarily like the question, but because it depends on various factors. But that's usually something that I get from interviewee.
That's good.
What we really didn't actually touch upon, and what the questions I often get as well, is how do you look from an investment perspective? How do you select the companies in the end, and what factors do you look at? I think also investing, by the way, yes, it's about money and about getting a return in the end, but it's mainly about people in the end. People invest in people. So that's for me the line that goes through everything we do. It's a people's business.
And the last question: what is your superpower? What are you extremely great at? Don't be shy. Don't be Belgian.
It's hard to tell about yourself, right?
Don't be Belgian. For me, I would say I can be very calm and collected in very harsh situations. And sometimes in a startup, you need those kind of people to just keep the coolness.
Yeah, and I think in my sense, it's also kind of defining a bit the North Star of where we can provide great support to founders and help execute on that and bring the right people around the table to do that. I'm not necessarily the best person in doing the startup coaching myself. I don't know. I leave that to others to judge. But bringing the right people and forces together to, I would say, drive the ecosystem forward, I think that's one of the powers I might have to some extent.
Fantastic. That is why our podcast is called SuperHero Conversations. We're talking with superheroes with superpowers here. So guys, thank you so much for talking. And we see you all on Supernova
For sure.
2025. That will happen on the 27th and the 28th of March in Antwerp, Belgium. Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot. I'm looking
Thanks
forward.
for having us.